Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to have Michael Black here. The more that he became ill last week, actually, and we had to reschedule his talk to today. So Michael Black is a director of the Max Planck Institute here locally, and he's leading the group on perceiving systems, computer vision. And today he's talking about building a digital human. It's about learning body shape. I'm very much looking forward to your talk, Michael.
Thanks very much. Am I
Live. There I'm live. Yeah, sorry, I was scheduled to talk on Friday, but I was deathly ill. I haven't been so sick in a long time, and I may still cough and so on. But hopefully it goes fine. I think I have enough energy to tell you this story, because it's a fun story, and I guess the title actually should be on learning a digital human. Though the learning here is not going to be terribly sophisticated based on the things that you've already seen in this summer school. It's going to be fairly straightforward. What's going to be interesting maybe is the data, the models, and the applications. And maybe some of that will get you excited about things you can do with human bodies yourself. So this is a long story. It goes back to before I came to Germany, back to Brown University. And all of these people have been involved. The top row are the people who have been most actively involved recently. And I'll be talking mostly about the work of Javier, Matt, Naureen, Federica, Gerard, and if there's time, some work from Ageliki. So, how many people saw Fast and Furious 7? All right, this is a high proportion for an academic crowd, I'll tell you. I've asked that question before, and most people I get blank stares. But if you saw that movie, you maybe heard that the lead actor died during the making of the movie, and they had to replace his face throughout the rest of it. I guess his brother played him, and then they stuck the original actor's face on his brother, and it cost $50 million to do that. Well, this idea of face replacement has been around now since really became famous with the work of The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, where Brad Pitt played characters of many different ages, and his face was replaced throughout the movie to really very, very realistically. So this has kind of become something that, while it's expensive to do, we see it all the time, and we don't really notice what's happening. With full bodies, it's a little bit different. So I don't know, how many people saw World War Z? Okay, more. That's a good movie, actually. So, and here you see the bodies. These are all digital bodies. They're partly manually animated, partly procedurally animated. But the thing to notice is you only see them from a distance. They're all little tiny things, so you never really get to look at them up close. So they don't have to be too accurate. When we do see bodies that are simulated up close, they tend to be things like this lizard or superheroes like Spider-Man. So our expectations for what they should look like are not so high. Now, how many people saw Gravity? Right, so that's a really good movie, and most of it, you probably know, it almost qualified as an animated film because almost the entire thing was digital, except for the faces, actually, in this case. The faces were shot live and then put on top of digital characters. So when I saw this sequence, after Sandra Bullock survives the horror out in outer space, she makes it back to the safety of her capsule, at least for a while, and then she's sitting there, lying there, floating weightless. And I thought, well, this is clearly an example of CG, because how else do they get somebody to float so effortlessly weightless? It turns out the only thing CG about Sandra Bullock here is her right leg. The rest of it is her. And she was actually sitting on a bicycle seat and very carefully controlling her muscles to move her body as though she were weightless. Or she was at times suspended on these trapeze wires. So in this case, they actually didn't do body replacement. They actually shot Sandra Bullock performing all of these weightless activities. And then what you see here is a shot from the movie where everything in this entire shot is computer graphics except Sandra Bullock. So the fire, the spaceship, the debris floating around, everything is completely animated except for her. And so we see this face replacement going on in the movies, but full bodies, why is that hard? Well, I think they are harder. Faces don't have as many muscles, they don't have as many bones. The human body has about 600 muscles and about 200 bones. And I say about because nobody seems to agree on what the actual number is. If you go on the web, the most prominent number is something like 230, but that comes from Muhammad. He actually said how many bones there were, and then this gets repeated, though he hadn't actually dissected bodies, so I don't think he actually knew the exact number. And then there's many different kinds of joints, a couple hundred joints, and those are many different types. And then we have all this soft tissue motion. We bulge and we jiggle, and depending on what you ate at the coffee break, your shape may be different than it was when you started. So to model all of this is quite complicated, and what we're going to do today, I'm going to show you a model this is our latest called DINA, in which we're able to model different body shapes, how they vary with pose, and the dynamics of soft tissue as they move around and jiggle. So I'll tell you how we get to that, but the basic goal is going to be to represent the body shape of basically any person. So we don't model children, and we don't model people undergoing sex change operations and so on. So we don't model every body, but we model most bodies. We have to model how they deform as they move. We have to model soft tissue dynamics. And then there's physiological shape changes like breathing or your shape change during pregnancy or as we age. All of these things we would also like to model, and I probably won't have time to talk about those today. And we'd like it all to be really simple, low-dimensional, so an animator can use it, or a computer vision algorithm can search over the parameter space of these models and make it feasible. And so that's the challenge. Now, I had to put something about Hinton in here, and it's got nothing to do with deep learning. But Geoff Hinton's first paper in 1976 was on this very early model of the human body, and it was called a puppet. And he used relaxation labeling, which is a lot like belief propagation, but not probabilistic, to fit the parameters of this two-dimensional model to, I don't know what it was actually that he was fitting, because he didn't really have data. But this is where the field started in the 70s. And around that same time, David Marr and Keith Nishihara were formulating this idea that human bodies could be represented as a compositional structure where the components are things like cylinders that get pieced together, and you can represent humans this way, or cows, or monkeys, or other things. Around the same time, Navacha and Binford did something really quite amazing, is they used generalized cylinders and fit them to range scan data, but of course they didn't have a Kinect at the time. There was no such thing as a range scanner, so they had to build one first. This is how hard a PhD was in computer vision in the 70s. You first had to build your own Kinect scanner, basically, and then you could begin to do research. And the very first use of a human body for tracking in video was David Hogg in 1983. Oh, and so people should, no? No? Okay. If somebody has an earlier reference, let me know. But so Hogg did this in 83, and then the field really didn't make much progress after that. Nobody could really reproduce the result. In 2000, we had a paper on using particle filters to track the same kind of cylindrical body models. And the problem with all of these methods up until around the early 2000s is they all assumed the human bodies looked like the Tin Man, and they rarely do. So then what changed? Well, the US Army commissioned a major scanning study. At this point, 3D scanners came out, and you could scan the entire body with, it was a cyberware scanner at the time, excuse me. And they scanned a couple thousand people, and now it's up to 4,000 people in the US and Europe. And this data set was made sort of publicly available. And that led to a rash of new work, beginning in 2003 with the work of Alan Curlis et al. Now this looks pretty crappy today, and you'll see that it is, but this was actually pretty serious state-of-the-art stuff. It's circa 2005. This is the work of Drago Angolov and his colleagues, and it's called SCAPE. This was a really significant piece of work that appeared at SIGGRAPH. And they took some scans of people, and they learned a model called SCAPE, and this was in 2005. And I'll talk quite a bit about this today, though I'm not going to go into great details. So, people should stop me and ask me questions along the way. Just throw up your hands, and I will be happy to elaborate on things that you want to hear more about or less about. So let's start with the secret life of triangles. So basically everything in Hollywood, most things, are meshes. And I'm not assuming any of you have any experience with graphics or meshes, so let's consider what we can do with a triangulated mesh. So this is just a piece of the body, and let's consider one triangle. And so what can happen to a triangle? Well, we can move it in 3 dimensions, so that's 3 numbers. We can rotate it around 3 axes, that's another 3 numbers. We can uniformly scale it, that's another number. And we can shear it in a plane, and that's another 2 numbers. And so everything you could possibly do to a triangle, and more actually, can be described by 9 numbers. There's actually a lower dimensional representation of these deformations, but it's not important here. So so we're going to sweep under the rug other parameterizations of triangle deformations. But for now, all you have to realize is that with 9 numbers, we can represent this as a 3x3 matrix that we use to transform a triangle from one position and orientation and scale and shape to another, right? And if we do this for every triangle in the body with precisely the right numbers, we will get another human body of a different shape. Now, there are, the mesh we're going to use in the rest of the talk has about 15,000 triangles, 9 numbers, so that's 135,000 numbers to represent human body shape. And this shape is going to just be a transformation of the triangles from a base mesh, a template mesh, an average person, for example, to somebody else's body shape and pose. Now, of course, this is 135,000 dimensional space, and most settings of these numbers are pointless and meaningless. They don't correspond to humans. They might correspond to octopuses or something else. Or they don't even correspond to valid meshes, i.e. connected meshes with no holes in them, right? So what the game here is going to be to try to characterize the 135,000 numbers that correspond to people. That make sense? Pardon me. So the idea is we're going to collect up a lot of examples. So here are some examples from the Caesar data set of human bodies, and you see that we all vary quite a lot in how we bulge, and there's a lot of variability in human body shape. And so we're going to have 4,000 scans, 2,000 men, 2,000 women, from the US and Europe. So they're not really representative of the entire globe, but it's a pretty good sample. But then we also need to know how body shape is going to change as they move around. And so we're going to have to collect people in thousands of poses doing all kinds of things. And you can see that body shape varies a lot as we move. Now, the big trick is now we're going to have thousands of bodies and thousands of poses. What we need to do before we could do statistics on this and try and characterize the space of shape deformations is we're going to have to put them all into correspondence. And I'll describe what that means, because that's going to be really the great challenge. Any questions? Okay, good. So then we're going to, once we do that, the strategy is going to be as follows. We're going to have a base mesh, this thing in the middle here, and we're going to factor body shape into different kinds of causes. One of them is going to be identity, so this will characterize this by some numbers beta, which will describe a shape change, deformations of the triangles. Everything is deformations of the triangles. Or a pose change, which will characterize by theta, and that's going to be something to do with the rigid rotation of some body parts, and then some non-rigid deformations that go along with that. And then we're also going to talk about soft tissue deformations. I'll describe those by some parameters delta. And then, if there's time, I'll talk about breathing. Excuse me. So let's start off with the basic thing, pose and shape, so you get the idea. So the first thing is to put everything into correspondence. We've got thousands of meshes. Let's just align them. So we got 4,000 bodies, and we want them to be in correspondence so that a vertex on the template mesh that corresponds, say, to the nose, the tip of the nose, corresponds to the tip of the nose on all of the different examples I see. And I'm going to have thousands and thousands of these meshes, and I don't want to go in and by hand click on the nose on all of them, so I want to make this fully automatic. In fact, we're going to have over 100,000 scans, and so this really has to be automatic, and it has to be robust. So what does alignment mean, or registration? So here's two meshes. You could tell they're meshes because there's some missing data. Look in the toes, and there's some noise in the face, and so on. And then alignment means that for every point on this mesh, I know the corresponding point on this mesh. And here I've just color-coded them. Not a very good color coding, but you can see the blue goes to blue, and purple to purple, and red to red, and so on. So that's what we want. We would like a dense correspondence between all these meshes. This illustrates the process. Before I tell you how we do it, we start with a scan, SI, and we're going to have a whole corpus of these scans. And you can see there's some missing data here in the toe. And then we take a template mesh T. I'll just play that again so you can see it. Template mesh T, which is just an average person in an average pose. And then we're going to want to change the pose and the shape to fit the scan data. And the thing on the left now should look like the thing on the right, only you may notice it's slightly lower resolution. So why is this hard? Well, it's really ambiguous. Fundamentally, it is ambiguous. So if I take a point on this guy's stomach, where does it correspond to on this guy's stomach? It's not entirely clear. Maybe belly button to belly button or something is clearer, or tip of the finger to tip of the finger. But there's a lot of big smooth parts of the body where it's not really clear what to do. And then there's a lot of variation in how we look as we change pose. There's a lot of occlusion, self-occlusion. We can't see the back of the knee here anymore. There's missing data because the person was outside the range of our scanner. So it becomes a really hard problem. And it gets even harder when we allow self-contact because effectively the topology of the body changes when there's self-contact. So the idea to make this robust was the following. So if I already had a good model of the human body that was low dimensional and I could fit it to data, then I could get really close to the solution and then I could just refine it. But we don't have a good model of the body, and so we have one of these chicken and egg problems. We need the registration to get a good body model, and we need a good body model to get a good registration. So the idea is we propose this method called co-registration that jointly solves these two problems: building the model, solving for the parameters of the model, and aligning to data. So just very quickly walking you through this, we have a corpus of scans, SK, and we're going to have a set of deformations of the template mesh, T star, to each of these alignments. So we're going to have TK of those. And we also have a model, a single model, P, which includes the pose parameters theta and the shape parameters beta. I haven't told you the details of the model yet, so don't worry about that. But it's some parametric model. And I have an objective function where I want to solve for the parameters of the model, P, and all of the alignments, TK, given all of the scans, SK. And there's it's a simple, well, it's not that simple, but whatever. There's a geometry term that penalizes differences between the aligned template TK and the observed scan SK. This is the important term, a model coupling term, that says that my model, P, should look like each of my templates. I should be able to adjust the parameters here to look like all of my aligned templates, and my aligned templates should be regularized to look like the model. So when I differentiate this objective function with respect to the model parameters, P, I'm solving for the model so that it's close to all of the aligned data, and when I differentiate with respect to the alignments, I'm keeping the model fixed, and I'm trying to make sure that I regularize my alignments to look like my model, so I can't deviate too much from what people look like. And hopefully that whole thing converges. And there's some priors in there to make sure that it does and it behaves well. So just to illustrate that again, we start with the pink average person in an average pose. We have a scan here, which is now unfortunately green, and we align to it, and we get the following thing. Now there's a lot more to it, actually. Unfortunately, there's a global search over the pose, and it's stochastic, and it's a little bit messier, and there's some priors, and I didn't tell you about, but go ahead, question.
15,000 triangles, you said, and each one we can find it the correspondence and find a rigid registration between them. But so is everything locally rigid in this case? And if so, then how are we sure that it's going to be consistent?
Yeah.
We're not going to have one mesh out, one mesh now.
Yeah. Okay. So good question. So let me repeat the question. So. So each triangle is going to be deformed in some way, and the first part of the question was, do we assume that that's somehow locally rigid, that there's some local rigidity assumption? And this is not in here. At various times, we have had some assumption on the deformation is locally rigid, or as rigid as possible. But to really change your shape into my shape, that isn't possible. We have to allow some sort of deviation from that rigidity assumption. Then I think the second part of the question is, well, isn't it still going to be ambiguous? I mean, there's lots of ways you could satisfy this. And that's indeed the case. And there's a piece of this work which I'm not going to tell you about, which is that we also use image texture information. And for many of the scans, when we have many scans of the same person, we paint a high resolution texture on the body. And that way, we use the texture information to make sure that we've got alignment across time. And so we can always check whether our alignment methods are actually working well or not. Across people, we can't do that because if I paint you with a texture and I paint me with a texture, I can't expect your texture is going to match my texture, or that your moles or your freckles are going to match my moles or freckles. So there, what we do sometimes is we identify key landmarks, and then we make sure that we don't actually use these during the alignment in general. It's not in my objective function here, but we check that we do some validation to make sure that key anatomical landmarks like this little bony thing you can feel here on everybody, that we haven't screwed up in some way. Yeah, good. Other questions? All right. So that's the alignment process. After we've done that, we actually are going to build our model from 1,800 scans of, I don't know, how many people at this point? Kind signal. Okay. And this is a sampling of those, maybe it's all 1,800, I don't know, of aligned bodies. Okay? And then there's also these 4,000 men and women, 2,000 men, 2,000 women, all in roughly the same pose. So that's the input to our learning method. And then the learning method is going to be really, really simple. So every point's in a 135,000 dimensional space. We want a low-dimensional model. We're just going to do PCA on this vector, these vectors, right? So here's just the first three principal components, and we've projected in here men and women. This is doing them in the same space. We typically, as you see, they form these sort of nice Gaussian-like clusters. So we tend to do them separately. We do men and women, separate PCA space for each. So what does that mean? Well, first thing we do is we compute the average of these deformations. This is a deformation from our base mesh, and here's the average man and the average woman in the Caesar data set. Since this was collected, people have gotten heavier, but these folks don't look too unhealthy. And then we compute deviations from that. And so I'll just take you through the first few principal components. Of course, the first couple are things like height and weight. And then there's other things like, ratio of do you have a long torso or a short torso, or various things like that. And so for the women, the first few principal components here, these are not the ones we actually are using today, but it doesn't really matter. They all look, you basically get these sort of variations. So you can imagine in this PCA space, I could pick out any one of you and represent your body approximately with some combination of these components. And so that's exactly what we do. So when we want to create a new body like the one on the right, we start with a mean body shape, and then we literally add some multiple of these different principal components to get the new shape. And so these linear coefficients are what I'll call beta. That's my descriptor of body shape. And it's like a body shape fingerprint or something that describes your particular body shape. Any questions about that? Yeah.
So all meshes have exactly the same number of channels?
Yeah, so the scans that we take obviously have vastly different numbers of triangles, and they have many, many more than we actually want. So the alignment process takes a standard template mesh and aligns it to every one of those. So now we have, for every body, the exact same number of triangles, and they're all completely in correspondence. Yeah.
So questions, so what about the clothes? Or like, did you make it where they're all exactly the same, like shorts or whatever?
Yeah, it's a good question.
What about the hair, like facial hair?
Okay, good question. So the first one was about clothing. I'm not going to tell you what we do about clothing. You can apply similar ideas to modeling clothing deformations, which we have done. Here we try to get everybody wearing a fairly standard set of sort of like tights or bikini briefs for men and women we have them in a like a sports bra type top in general. Do you see that? Yeah, you absolutely do that. Do see the effect of clothing in the principal component space. You see bra straps, for example, quite often, and it's a feature of the model. Whether you want that or not is unclear. For hair, one thing I'll show you actually, so we tend to, I didn't go into this, but we tend to remove the back of the head and all of the hair and lock it to a rigid sculpt shape that just deforms with the rest of the head. Because otherwise what you'll see, there's actually really, in women, the first couple principal components, you see this bun going here. So we had all the women, this is from the Caesar data set, they had all the women with a bun, all their hair pulled up. And it's really interesting, if you look at the correlation of body shape with age, this bun thing pops out. It's like the younger you are, the more hair you have, and you end up with this big bun. And old women have very short hair in general, and so they have this concave head thing. So anyway, so there's a lot of little details about what we do to deal with it. And facial hair, we don't have a significant amount of facial hair here, and it's certainly not big volume. I mean, this was sort of hipster, big beard thing. So I don't know, maybe it needs to be redone. Hair is a really interesting thing to model geometrically, and in Hollywood, when you see hair simulation, they're typically simulating every single hair, like on a creature, on a person. It's incredibly labor-intensive, and there are no good methods yet for scanning people in this room and capturing your hair and then modeling it, whether it be long hair, short hair, facial hair. There are not good methods for this. Geometrically, each strand of hair is pretty simple, and I think there should be nice ways of doing statistics on hair, and it's an ongoing project. If anyone's interested in it, talk to me. I said that we do PCA on this, by the way. That implies we're looking at these statistics in a Euclidean space. The transformations on hair or on body triangles in general are not Euclidean. I mean, you think we've got rotations, so those live in SO3. In general, the deformations live on a manifold, and we don't necessarily do PCA. We do something called PGA, principal geodesic analysis, where you do the statistics on the manifold. The math gets a little bit more complicated for very little gain. It actually, you could get fancy about the whole thing, but it's really not all that important. So that's why I haven't told you about it. Just think PCA. Other questions? Yeah.
Have you yet studied which of the components are changeable by weight loss, for example, which by age, and which is fixed for your entire life?
Yes. So very good questions. The question is, have we studied how these principal components vary with your age, your fitness level, which ones are sort of intrinsic to you and last your whole life, and so on? These are really good questions, and we have looked at them. We can vary them with, for example, fitness level or age, and there's a web app I'll point you to where you can go play with that. Actually, I don't know if I have that here. Bodyvisualizer.com bodyvisualizer.com. You can go there. If your browser's is WebGL enabled, you can play with this, and there's a fitness slider if I'm not forgetting. And but yeah, that's really interesting. Also, you could think about correlating this with genetics. You could think about correlating these things with all sorts of stuff. There's a whole lot of fun that you could have, indeed. But Philip reminds me I'm going to run out of time. So I haven't told you about pose. Pose is really important, right? So this is just static shape. The pose, what we're going to do for pose is something that Angelov proposed in the escape model. It's very simple. It's kind of brain dead, but it actually works. We're going to look for every triangle. Every triangle T, we're going to find a simple linear function of pose that's going to take in the pose of the sort of 2 or 3, it doesn't really matter, some number of neighboring parts. And it's going to learn a linear transformation based on the poses of those parts to observe deformations. You don't really need to understand this, but it's, if I change the pose of the person, I'm going to have to apply some deformations, like the muscles have to bulge a little bit, and that's just going to be a simple linear function. You could get fancier, but let me show you what the model looks like. So what's a model of the body? So on the bottom right is a scan. You can always tell it's a scan. There's always some missing data. This is several different women in a data set, and you can see this high-frequency texture pattern I mentioned on them. Here, we're just linearly interpolating between the shapes of these people. So when this shape changes, the shape here changes. And you should see no pose variation here. You should just see shape. And here's the average woman in this data set, and you should just see pose variation. You should see her face should stay the same, her body should stay the same, and you should only see pose changing. So these two things should be factored. And then here they are combined, pose and shape varying at the same time, and here we've texture mapped it. So this, and this are an example of the model just projected into 2D so you can see it. Make sense? Any questions? Yeah. Great. So the question is, can you combine like different bodies at different faces? Well, faces and bodies are correlated, it turns out. So your height and the height of your body and your face height are highly correlated. So if you're a short person, you tend to have a short face and so on. So if you really screwed that up, it might look weird. But indeed, one can take off the face and put on a different face, which would be great for Fast and Furious 8, I guess. And in terms of psychology experiments, we are with collaborators here in cybernetics. We're doing some interesting work, particularly with anorexics. There we scanned a lot of anorexics. And can you not hear me in the back? Oh, they have a question? Well, hang on. Okay. So one hypothesis about anorexia is it's actually a disease of perception, that people see their body and they actually believe that they're fat, even though they're clearly not. And so what we can do, we scan these people, and then we create an avatar, and they go into this VR environment where they see a full-dimensional version of themselves that they really identify with. And then we can change stuff. We can make them fatter. We can do all sorts of things. And in doing that, we can actually shift, maybe, a little bit their perception. So there's a very strong after effect. If I scan you, and then I put on 10 or 20 pounds, and show it to you, and you just stare at it for a couple minutes, it's clearly you. You have no trouble identifying if it is you. And I put you back to your normal weight. You will swear, absolutely swear 100% that I have made you too skinny. It really, really, there's an after effect that's very, very strong. So it's fun to do psychology. Yeah, a question from the...
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
Okay. On the images that you're showing on the board, you were saying that you're like linearly interpolating something between images of doing real with shapes. But all of the images, they look like to move their arms from like a certain position to another position. So can you say how you make it look realistic?
Okay, you cut out a little bit there, but what we're interpolating between here are the parameters of the model. So in terms of shape, we're linearly interpolating between these betas, which correspond to one person's shape, and the betas corresponding to another person's shape. And then in the space of rotations, we're linearly interpolating between the rotations, which you may be asking, is that a dumb idea? Well, it probably is, but it works out fine here. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. That's.
Okay. All right. So let's put some so bodies aren't very interesting unless they move. So there's a long history of motion capture in the film industry, and you probably all know about this. You put a bunch of markers on the body, you use some special cameras and some infrared lights, and you track the markers, and you figure out the pose of the body in 3D. And if you followed this, in Hollywood, this is often really criticized as producing lifeless animations. For example, Polar Express got slammed for having this artificial style of body motion. And so let me take you through how this works. So somebody's in the lab, they've got a bunch of markers on, you recover the 3D location of these markers, and then you try to infer this unobserved skeleton that's underneath. And then what an animator does is they take this skeleton and they transfer it to a new character, and then they animate that character. And it doesn't look very good. So why doesn't it look very good? Well, I will argue that this is all the information you had. You had the surface of the body moving. And in fact, what you have here is a lot of soft tissue motion. These things are not mounted to your bones. You don't see the bones. They're mounted to your soft tissue. And in this performance is a whole lot of nuance, for example, the breathing of the person, that gets thrown away when you go to the skeleton. And then you take this skeleton, which has thrown away all the subtlety and the nuance, you try and animate a character, and then you wonder why it doesn't look good. So our idea is to, now that we've got this model of the body, why don't we fit it directly to these markers and ask the question, given a set of markers, can we estimate the body shape, the pose, the soft tissue motions, and all the things that go along with it that would have produced this set of 3D points moving through space? So this is the goal. Input, sparse set of markers. Output, a full 3D mesh of the performance of the person who must have been performing the thing. Of course, this is hugely under-constrained. We're going to have here 40, 50, 60, 70 markers at most. And then we're going to have, we want to get out a full 3D mesh. So the only way we could do this is if we have a good model of the body. And I've just argued that we could build a low-dimensional model of the body, and then we could fit it to this data. So I'm going to go very quickly, actually. The idea, there's sort of two pieces of this. The first one is, given a set of markers, I have to figure out what the body shape is and where the markers are on the body. And to do that, I'm going to minimize some, I'm just going to show you a picture. It's better to show you a movie. So we start with we take 12 random frames from a mocap sequence, and we take the average body shape. We know the gender in this case, but we can infer that as well. And we have some rough guess of where the markers might be on the body, because we know the marker set. Those are the blue dots here. And then we're going to estimate the body shape of the person and the pose in each of these 12 frames, as well as the marker locations on the mesh, such that I can explain the 12 mocap frames. And so what you see happening here is the body shape changes from this sort of average person to a heavy-set woman, and the location of the markers swap. And if you look at the head right now, someone had mislabeled the markers in the mocap data, and the algorithm figures that out and swaps them. So in the end, we get out from these 12 mocap frames an estimate of the person who must have performed the activity and where the markers must be. Does that make sense? Very quick. That basically means we could take mocap data. For example, this is from the CMU mocap data set, which is popular and has been used a lot in machine learning. And from the 47 markers, we can estimate the body shapes of all the people in the data set. And this basically turns your mocap system into a very crude 3D body scanner. Now that we've got the body shape, we just can estimate the pose of the person over time that best explains the mocap data. And I'll just show you that we've done that for much of the CMU mocap data set, and these are the kinds of motions you get out. So what does it look like? Given a bunch of marker data, we estimate this 3D body shape or this one and their motions. Now you should understand in our lab, we're computer vision people, and we really don't know very much about animation. So to get this quality of animation actually is rather hard for a non-professional animator. But for this is fully automatic. We just have some markers and estimate body shape. And I think what comes out is really much more subtle than what was there, people were getting out before, because we're pulling out all the nuance that was present in the mocap data set. So we could do things like retargeting. This person was the original person doing the salsa dancing. We had this big heavy guy in the lab, and he probably couldn't do this, but it looks pretty plausible. I think he's just really grooving, and I think you could see, except for the hands, which we don't have, you see really natural body motions come out, and then we can retarget that to new characters, which is what people in Hollywood want to be able to do. So, okay, that's all very cool, but there's still one problem. Everybody jiggles. So notice that the soft tissue motion here in the chest, you could maybe see it in the legs as well. And the observed markers on this guy are the green things, and then the body shape we've estimated is this checkered thing, and the red markers are affixed to the surface. Those are the estimated positions of those markers. And you can see at the chest here, they disagree because of the soft tissue jiggle. And this is not just because this guy's a little bit overweight. Everybody jiggles, I guarantee it. We have ways in the lab to make you jiggle. So the problem is we don't have a model of this soft tissue. And we would really like to be able to model it. So how are we going to do that? And to do that, we need, if we're going to take this machine learning approach, we're going to have to get some example data. And so that's what we're going to do in the last few minutes. And we're going to try and model these soft tissue motions. This is a paper that's going to appear at SIGGRAPH next month. I'm going to skip the previous work. Did people get a tour of the lab? So you probably saw the 4D scanner. So here's the 4D scanner. This is what the data coming out looks like. This is 22 color cameras, which we're not going to use here, 44 stereo cameras, and this is what the 3D meshes that come out, the raw meshes, look like. And so from these, you get really quite detailed soft tissue motion. You could see it here in the belly. This guy is really great to watch him. It's almost as though the fat it's like he's like a water balloon or something. It's spectacular. And so we get 3D meshes out like this at 60 frames a second. Now we're going to have tons of data. We're going to have over 100,000 scans. And now we have the same problem we had before. We have to put them all into alignment. And we have to do that automatically. So these are now aligned meshes using the same kind of co-registration technique I told you about before, but now applied to sequences. And now it should look like these patterns are stuck on the body, right? They're really moving with the body. She's a little speeded up. Okay, so we've got scans. We have these aligned templates. So this is just what we did before with co-registration. We have our body shape model, which we can fit to this, which captures nicely the pose deformation and her body shape. But you see it's missing some of the soft tissue stuff that's going on here because it doesn't know about the dynamics. And then there's some deviations from this, right? And this is just heat-coded here, so you can sort of see where the main deviations are in the chest and the stomach. All right, so given this kind of difference, we can now begin to build a model. So here's a video of that. There's the alignment. Here's our standard model we built before without the soft tissue dynamics. And here, just in a static pose, we're just applying to her body shape all of the stuff that this model doesn't capture, all of the non-rigid deformations. And you can see just even moving your arms, you end up with a lot of soft tissue motion. And here you could really see the fat moving around on the stomach. So this is what we would like to model now. And we're going to do, it's boring, I know, but we're just going to do PCA again to reduce the dimensionality of this. And so we get some principal components that happen to do with non-rigid deformations. It doesn't take very many of them to represent the shape. So here's the alignment on the right, just projecting this onto the PCA space. Even with 50 principal components, you can see this soft tissue here looks a lot more realistic than it does over here. And then we just use 300 because whatever, it looks pretty good. So no particularly principled reason. So, okay, very, very briefly, we now want to represent body shape not just with the shape of the identity of the person, which are these beta parameters. We're going to add some, so beta is this linear combination of some principal components U here and the mean shape deformation. So that's what we had earlier. We're now going to add a new parameter delta, which is again just going to be a new mean deformation, which isn't zero actually, or identity, and some new principal components here. And so it's just going to be an additive model, your body shape plus your non-rigid pose-dependent shape deformations. And those dynamic shape deformations are actually going to, we want to be able to capture things like waves propagating through the soft tissue. So after you jump, after the impact, the waves continue for a little bit. So we're going to use a second-order autoregressive model to capture that. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but it takes into account the velocity of the root of, say, your pelvis, the overall velocity of the body, as well as the angular velocities and accelerations of just the angular accelerations of the limbs. So, as a teaser for what this is going to look like, so this is examples of bodies animated using this technique called Dyna, and they look plausible. And yeah, reasonably nice soft tissue deformations. We can simulate motions that we've never seen before. So here's a case where we have seen these individuals in our training set, but we've never seen this kind of motion before. and you get plausible soft tissue results. Now, you may be asking, why don't you take a pure physics-based approach? You've got a bunch of data. We started with that. We thought, well, this is just like a finite element modeling problem, and we can define some masses and some springs and stuff like that and fit this. But it was very hard to control, and so we went with this pure learning-based approach, and it seems to generalize fairly well. So here is the case where the subject we've never seen before, and the motion is something we've never seen before. And we only have a fairly small set of training motions, but it seems to generalize outside that relatively well. So this is our equation. We have body shape, non-rigid shape, dynamic deformations. We can just take the body shape and we can, this is just a mesh, just a bunch of deformations of a triangle. We can plug anything we want in here. So we could just plug in some deformations that we want, which correspond to, for example, a different character or a different person, and then apply the non-rigid deformations, these temporal ones, the dynamic ones, to that new mesh. So for example, we can take the soft tissue deformations of this heavy guy, and we could take this skinny guy and apply them to this guy. And we end up with something that makes him look like a little bit more jiggly than he would have been otherwise. Or this slim woman, we apply this heavier woman's soft tissue deformations, and we get something that's more sort of bouncier. We can also take our friendly ogre here and apply this guy's soft tissue deformations to him, or any other sort of synthetic character. And then, so this is a way for animation people to retarget an actual human performance onto a synthetic character. We can also have some fun here by taking these linear coefficients that are multiplying these dynamic deformations and just scaling them. So here we just scale by a factor of 2 roughly, maybe it's 2.5. The original guy and his soft tissue deformations, and then an exaggerated version. And even though it's exaggerated, it still remains sort of plausible. It looks, so you can imagine animators wanting to do this also for dramatic effect. Now, there's one piece which I haven't told you about, and that is that obviously the way we jiggle depends a lot on our fitness and our weight and so on. And so what we actually did was we scanned people with different BMIs, or body mass index. Now, BMI is not a great measure. It's basically just, it's just a function of your height and your weight. So it doesn't take into account really your fitness level and where your fat is distributed on your body and all these other things. But we don't have that much data yet, so we just use this, and we basically trained a model that says that weights your deformations based on how similar you are in BMI to other people in the training set. And this allows, it allows us to plug in bodies. These are bodies out of the Caesar data set where we only have a single scan of the person. We've never seen them do anything. And we end up with different kinds of soft tissue deformations. So this woman's stomach and this woman's stomach look quite different from this woman's stomach because they have different BMI. And so they're essentially weighted differently in this space of training data that we have. All right, so good. Any questions on jiggling?
So you said that the model level was 2. That's mean 2 seconds or 2 frames?
I'm sorry, the autoregressive model is, it's 2 time instants, which would be a 30th of a second, I guess. It's 2 time instants. Yeah.
Faces don't seem to move. Do you think that's true?
What doesn't seem to move?
Faces of the
Yeah, the faces of the people don't seem to move very much. So we asked the subjects to keep a neutral face during the experiments. They don't always do that. Sometimes they smile because it's funny what they're doing. We haven't yet built a face model. Because Hollywood already had all this face stuff going on, we figured they already knew how to do that really well. I mean, they do it in the movies all the time. We thought there was nothing we could add, so let's just work on the bodies, and we ignored the faces. After we did this for a little while, we realized that to do that stuff in Hollywood with the faces, there's a huge amount of manual labor, and they do a beautiful job, but they don't actually know how to automate it, and they don't have a lot of training data, and they don't really... We now think that we have a whole bunch of tools that we could go back and do the faces. So that's a project that we're doing now to do more face stuff. But we were worried at first that we didn't have anything to contribute, and I think we do. Yeah.
So notice that you map off faces as sort of the standard face. Are you planning to extend it over to capturing facial expression?
Yeah, yeah. So this is really all this static phase. There should actually be maybe some soft tissue deformation in here, though I'm not seeing it. Maybe we don't have enough detail to see that, but there should be. Facial expressions, yeah, it's on the to-do list now. In fact, one of my pet projects I really want to do is it relates facial expressions to bodies. You know, I think we're very expressive with our bodies. Our bodies tell us a lot about whether you're happy or sad, afraid, feeling powerful, feeling weak. You know, bodies are very expressive things. And nobody has yet studied the correlation between face shape and body shape and posture. So I think that's a really fruitful direction.
Has anybody studied like the movement of the soft tissue, but like within the internal organs?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
think of like when a tumor, like trying to predict where a tumor goes, how it reacts to the arteries and all that.
Yeah, so tracking internal organs is, you have several ways to go. There are groups, and we worked on this a little bit, and then it turned out to be too hard and scary, but using biplane X-ray, so you have two X-ray systems giving you effectively a stereo view. You can have something, either an animal because you're exposing it to X-rays, it's relatively low dose, or a patient who needs this for some clinical reason, moving through such a thing, and then you can build up a model of both the outside and the inside. X-ray is not so good for the soft tissue, it's good for bones and stuff like that. That's just really, really early work. There's a group in Grenoble trying to do that now. I have a dream, obviously, that the scanner will eventually be this, like an MRI scanner that you can jump around in. So right now you can't do that. You can do real-time fMRI in a slice. So you can see somebody swallowing, for example, and you can watch all the soft tissue stuff going on inside while someone's swallowing, but you can't yet do the full body in motion. We do have a project with some doctors, though, in which we have MRI scans of the subjects. We fit our body model to them. We then can see obviously we see the external layer. We also can see the internal fat layer, so we then fit a model to the inside layer. We can remove all the fat, and then you can kind of see what's left over. Because what turns out to be really important is not how much fat you have. There's sort of two things that matter in terms of your health. One, where your fat is and what kind of fat it is. So if your fat is all around your internal organs, that is like really, really bad. So if you are soft and jiggly, everything's good. So basically, if you can grab it and it jiggles, it's all fine. But if you have one of those hard beer belly things, then that's a really, really bad thing because it means your fat's probably all around your internal organs, which is not healthy. So we work with some doctors here, and so this woman, the heavy woman who I've shown you several times, who jiggles a lot, she's very healthy. The doctors have all said she's got no problems, right? So she should just be happy. You know, she can be a little chubby and be happy, no problem. We have another woman who's has a slightly lower BMI, but she doesn't, when she moves, she's like rigid, and the doctors all say, oh, she's got a problem. It's interesting. So we're working on trying to figure out from, can you just jump around in front of your Kinect? And then I tell you, actually, you should go see your doctor because you've got problems. Yeah.
So, all the example bodies are in front view, but what would it be like if it is from a side view?
Oh, I'm sorry for showing you that. These are all three-dimensional. I could show you any view. I just, people jiggle more in the front, so I'm showing you that. I apologize. Yeah, they're 3D, so I don't have other views at the moment.
I wonder what the features that you use to like make the PCAs or etc. So do you just use the relative position of all the triangles, so you have some meta features or no complex things?
No, so really it's these not, so each triangle here is described by this 9x9 deformation matrix. And so it's really, you take this deformation matrix, you turn it into a vector, you stack 15,000 of those into one vector, that's it. No sort of feature analysis done on that at all. It's just straight PCA on those things. It's as dumb as you could get. It actually works pretty well. Other questions at the moment? Yeah.
I'm wondering about, can you infer how a person who has muscles, because the muscles also like
Yeah.
affect
Yeah, so muscles. So we have. So the question is, can we infer things about how much muscle somebody has? We don't really have enough data that's sort of controlled to really model muscle bulging. And right now, I didn't explain this, but our model of pose deformation is one we built from these 1,800 scans, and we lump everybody together. Well, men and women separately, but we lump all the men together, independent of how heavy they are or how muscular they are. So we get kind of an average pose-dependent deformation, which is obviously not the right thing. We need more data, though, I think, to really pull out muscularity. All right. So I'm out of time. I can show you some people breathing while we're at it. We captured scans of people breathing, and then we built a model. Again, this was a little bit more complex model. It turned out that linear models didn't work here, and we ended up with a more complicated and interesting nonlinear model of breathing, but we did it in such a way that breathing was a function of the volume of the lungs, and also different types of breathing. It turns out people breathe in different ways. You breathe more with your chest, you can breathe more with your stomach. If you sing, you probably know a lot about how to control your diaphragm and breathe in different ways. But then we came up with this way of animating characters, doing something we call breath acting. Basically, you watch an animated character, and then you breathe their part into this device called a spirometer, which is a medical thing which measures how much air is coming in and out of your lungs. So that's another little fun thing. And of course, then we can animate. For SIGGRAPH, you always have to animate characters. So that's it. The basic idea was to learn a body model from thousands of scans. And the key enabling technology here was this idea of co-registration that gave us really accurate data. From the mocap point of view, the idea here was that people have been throwing away all the subtle data that was present in the mocap data set. Don't throw it away. Use your model to pull it out. We got this new 4D scanner, which lets us capture soft tissue motion, and then we can model soft tissue motion. So the basic story here is that really data is the thing that lets this happen, and that's what was missing in the early days, and now we have really good models of the body because we have lots of data. But it has to be high quality, it has to be aligned, it has to be registered, and there were several questions about what about stuff going on inside the body, and there's a whole other way you could go here. You could actually try very physically based modeling of the muscles and the soft tissue and so on, and companies like Weta Digital just won an Academy Award for this recently, do this for creatures, but nobody does it yet for humans because getting it right is just really, really hard. And we don't have tools to look inside the body and see what it's actually doing to do the learning. There's lots of applications in computer vision for tracking and pose estimation and so on. You can imagine using our model now to synthesize training data. If you're wanting to build an algorithm for detecting people and you need lots of examples of realistic people in different poses, well, this is a way to simulate that. We're working not just on body fat analysis, but also some skin cancer detection, which I didn't tell you about. I mentioned briefly the psychology perception experiments in the case of anorexia, but we've got other things going on about attractiveness, power, social roles, and all kinds of things. This is collaboration with Betty Moller's group here. And then there's a spin-off company called Body Labs. If anyone wants a job, they're hiring, by the way. And they're doing this sort of stuff for the clothing industry in general, as well as a bit of fitness things. But it's something new for the clothing industry. But as people pointed out, there's still missing things. Hair, hands are a big problem, faces. We're working on those. Capturing realistic textures from the body, and then clothing is really, really hard, and we have some work going on in that. We also have a home body scanner with Connect, and, well, there's a bunch of stuff. If you're interested, there's a bunch of stuff on the web. You can go to our website here on the Max Planck campus, or some of these, if you want data, there's 40,000 scans. The data is actually there now of this dynamic stuff, so if you want to work on modeling soft tissue motion, you can just download this data set. Oh, and you can check out bodyvisualizer.com if you want to play with the 3D model a little bit. And I just remind you that here's the great team of people, and the friendly neighborhood ogre thanks you for your attention. we have time for one more, couple more questions? Yeah.
What's the application to the clothing industry?
So what's the application of the clothing industry? There's many of them. So the clothing industry is really old-fashioned. The way they design clothing is, they have a physical dress form and they drape patterns on it, and then sometimes they bring in a fit model, a human, and they dress them and they see how it looks. If you can replace this all with a digital body, and you have a statistical model of your customer population, so if you're the Gap, you might have a particular customer population, you might know what they look like. If you're Nike, you might have a different population, and then you can design to them in 3D and go through your entire process in 3D. The other thing is this allows them to look at the dynamics of how the clothing is going to work on a body. So particularly for athletic clothing, where people are doing, number one, athletes have weird bodies, just like particular top athletes all have weird bodies, by definition almost. And then they do weird things, and the companies want to know how the clothing performs. But my ultimate goal is that one day I can shop on the web for clothing. I just want to stand in front of my Kinect, turn around, get a model of my body, and then go shop and know that the clothing is going to fit me and I'm not going to have to return it, because I hate going to the store, I hate trying stuff on, nothing fits me, and I just want to be able to shop on the web. So that's the main goal. Yeah.
So with these extreme body shapes, like the woman you showed with the giant head and,
Yeah.
and the possibly slim waist,
Yeah.
are these just linear combinations of the things that actually came out?
Interesting question. So the question was, does this guy live in my 3D space, PCA space? The answer is no. He is way, way, way outside the space of human bodies, as is that the office worker woman with the big head and the narrow waist, right? These people are not. These people are, complete outliers in the space of human body shapes. But there was one slide I went by very quickly where I said, well, let's just take out that linear combination of body shapes and just plug in an arbitrary mesh and then apply all these other deformations on top. And that's what we did here. And it seems to work fine, right?
Like a handcrafted model.
Yeah, absolutely. Other questions? Good. Well, thanks for all your questions. I appreciate it.